Hi, and welcome to Successful Phone and Video Interviews. I'm Nadia Whiteside. Today we're going to discuss the phone interview, the recruiter phone screen, which is the first step in the interview process, preparing for a video interview, setting up your space, understanding technology, and then we'll end with some common questions and best answers for phone and video interviews. So let's get started. We want to begin with the phone interview, and this is becoming more and more common, and certainly during these COVID times, it's about the only way that you're going to be communicating with recruiters and hiring managers is via phone and video. So let's start preparing for that phone interview. The first step is to be ready. This is a totally different time we're living in. Our new normal is that we're communicating through our computers rather than face-to-face, so there's always a little bit of anxiety. So in preparation for your phone interview, I like to have people start with just kind of physically shaking out the anxiety, the stress, getting yourself motivated. And the best way to do that is to do just a couple minutes of exercise to get ready beforehand. And that may be as simple as jogging in place, do a couple, laps up and down the stairs or something like that. But kind of shake out your body and get loose, because we're going to talk about energy level and how to project your personality, your energy, and your enthusiasm over the phone in a way that will help convey your excitement about the position, your personality, and help compensate for the fact that the interviewer can't look at you physically. Have your documents laid out as well. So I recommend having your resume on hand, because they may be referring to that over the phone, the job description for which you're interviewing, and some notes. If you're working off of a laptop and communicating through that way, it's nice to have some Post-its around the perimeter and things like that, or just have a nice large print bulleted list next to the phone before you start your interview. And the kind of notes I'm talking about are things like answers to common questions. You should have a few questions for the interviewer. Some points you really want to drive home about the job specifically. So hopefully you've highlighted your resume and aligned that with some highlighted passages in the job description that you think will be great talking points for the conversation. So those are the kinds of paper preparations you want to have kind of laid out on your desk or a table before you get on the phone. Okay? Make sure your phone is fully charged. We got to be mindful of technology in these times. And, you want your focus to really be on how you're presenting yourself. So the last thing that we need to deal with is technology issues. So make sure your phone is charged, you're in a nice quiet space with no distractions, and that you can really focus your attention on the interview, and that the interviewer won't have any distractions on the other end, and they can focus on what you have to say. Let your friends and family know that you have a call scheduled, so they don't call or ring your doorbell at home during the interview time. So I recommend just shooting a text or email out to those in your life and just say, I know we're all on lockdown right now. Just want to let you know if you could please refrain from calling or coming by between 2 and 3 o'clock today. I've got an important call I'd like to focus on. Thanks so much for your support. That's the best way to ensure that that quiet space you've designated stays quiet. Have a bullet point answer sheet prepared for those common questions. So that goes back to the documents that you want to have laid out. Bullets, large print, that's going to help you when you're on the phone to not get too distracted, but have a nice reference point. So there aren't any hms or ums during the call. You don't hesitate. One of the things to be really mindful of are your time constraints. Phone interviews tend to be a little bit more brief than in person. And so you want to make the most of that time that's been designated for the phone interview. And on that same vein, my last tip is be aware of time zone differences so you don't miss the call. And that's something that we all have to be aware of these days. We're doing a lot of calls internationally with different time zones and things like that. So when you schedule a call, be aware of where that interviewer is calling from. If there's a big time difference, you don't want to get stuck having an interview at 6 a.m. because it's 9 a.m. there. So feel free to make recommendations as well to the interviewer based on the time zone differences, or at least let them know about that and schedule that accordingly. Let's talk about what we're going to do during the phone interview now that we're all set up. First of all, you'll want to answer the phone promptly to demonstrate that you're enthusiastic about the position and you're ready to talk, anxious and ready. Greet the interviewer politely and thank them for their time and interest. That's a great way to start the conversation on a really positive note. And also it reinforces for them that, they should be excited and looking forward to the conversation as well. Be thoughtful and remember to breathe when providing answers. So pace yourself. I know we all tend to talk really quickly when we're nervous, and some of us will hesitate and have that kind of quiet time or dead space, as they say in the radio business, when we're looking at notes and such. Be mindful of the fact that you're at home and on the phone and they can't see your facial expressions. They can't see you looking in the air or thinking of the best answer. So just keep your breath steady. That's one of those great preparation exercises while you're stretching or walking up and down the stairs, is just to kind of practice your breathing and get yourself on pace for a nice controlled phone conversation. I like to recommend, and have found this really helpful for myself when I'm talking on the phone, to actually stand up. There's something that happens with our diaphragm and the way we project our voice if we're standing and smiling during the call. Some enthusiasm comes through. You can almost hear it on the other end. So I'm smiling right now while I'm talking to you, and I hope that you can hear that. And I find for myself when I'm speaking that standing and even walking around slowly at a nice pace tends to help me with my conversation skills over the phone. So I'd like you to try that, and maybe you want to rehearse with a friend before the interview. But excuse me, try standing and smiling. And finally, I think it's important to be authentic in your tone and voice. Let your personality be heard over the phone. So I consider myself a little bit of an extrovert. I love to engage with people, and I'm hoping that you're hearing that over this recording. And that's what I want to project, is this is how I actually talk to people face to face. Is I smile, I try to be engaging, I use eye contact. So how do we overcome the eye contact issue over the phone? We smile, we show enthusiasm, and we stay on point. So that's a great way to convey some of the things that you can't physically over the phone. And so just keep those in mind over the phone, that you want to sound just like if you were talking to your best friend when you're talking to the interviewer. You want to grab them and engage them. And remember, that's a person on the other line. Even though they do this for a living, they might have some anxiety about talking to someone over the phone that they've never met. It's not comfortable for anyone. These are awkward times, and to engage people in this manner, in this format, when we're used to doing it in person, can be a little challenging for all of us. So make it easier for yourself and the interviewer, and they'll really appreciate it. So let's move on to phone screening with a recruiter. And as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, this is typically the first stage or the first step in the interview process. And nowadays, depending on the position that you're applying for, you can expect to have about 3 or 4 interviews for a job. And that sounds really daunting, but there is a method to that madness. It's both for your benefit and that of the hiring staff with the company. And the phone screen is used by recruiters to kind of weed out those candidates that really aren't a good match for the position to begin with. And if you think about yourself, perhaps you have done that maybe as a new graduate or someone who's not quite sure what you're looking for, or you just really need a job and so you're willing to do anything. You may be applying for positions that aren't an ideal fit. A recruiter's job is to work on behalf of that company who's hiring and screen out those candidates that aren't a fit. So you should be mindful of that going in. When you get contacted by a recruiter, oftentimes it won't be scheduled. And so you need to be prepared in advance. So let's dig into that a little bit and talk about what you can do to be best prepared and understand as well where the recruiter's coming from, okay? So their point of view is this. They are working on behalf of the company to screen applicants and to reduce that number to the best candidates that they can get for the next step of the interview process. So they're really looking for ways to weed out people who aren't a fit for that job. They're looking at the criteria that the company provided. They also use a numeric system to rank the applicants, and they will be evaluating you with a point system while you're on the phone for that screen. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you're kind of being tested while you're on that recruiter call. Here's what you need to know about a recruiter phone screen as opposed to a phone interview. This is the most common format for first interviews. It is basically a non-scheduled short call in which a recruiter can contact you at any time following your application to that company. So once you submit that application, whether it's through mail, fax, most likely an online application, once you submit that, you need to be immediately prepared. So just like with a phone interview, you want to start having materials ready and be prepared for that call at any time. Preparation is the key. And as I said, a recruiter assigns points to each candidate based on their responses to standard questions. And there's a minimum score that you as the candidate will need to attain in order to move on to the next step in the hiring process. So my job as a career coach is to help you get those questions knocked out, really secure the necessary points so that you can move on in the hiring process. So I want to help coach you through a most successful phone interview. And how we do that is be prepared first and foremost for the most common questions. And remember that time is of the essence. You are undoubtedly going to be asked, what are you looking for in your next job? Or why did you apply to this company? Very common questions. Be prepared to answer that. What are your salary expectations? So my advice on the salary expectations question is that you need to do your homework in advance. The job description itself may list a salary range. Typically they do at least have a range that would be commensurate with experience. So you'll want to be able to address that question and not knock yourself out of the running. So as long as the expectations that are stated in the job description meet your own and you're willing to work for a salary in that range, go ahead and apply. If no salary is listed, then that's when you have to do a little research on your own. Glassdoor is a great way to start. Glassdoor.com is an online resource that allows you to research by company or positions in your state, in your area, so you can find out what the median salary is for that type of position with that type of company. And you can actually put that into the search box, program manager, and then you can put the company name. You can research the company itself on Glassdoor as well and get some other information beyond salary. Salary.com is another great resource that you can use. So have that research completed and have a salary range. I would say within $5,000 that you can present to that recruiter over the phone. So, I'm looking for 50 to 55,000, depending on the nature of the job and what would be required. That's an appropriate answer. You don't want to give a bigger span like $10,000 or $15,000. You want to be a little bit more specific and stay within what those, kind of median salaries are that you've researched. Another very common question is, what are you looking for in terms of company culture and benefits? And I'll go back to Glassdoor on that. That's a great website format for reading reviews from people who actually have worked for those companies. Another way to really understand company culture, benefits, expectations is to conduct informational interviews with people who already work for that company. And how do you do that? Well, hopefully you have a LinkedIn profile. If not, I would recommend having a basic profile set up on LinkedIn. It's free, and you can search for people in your city or town by position. So again, you can put in accounting manager or marketing director or whatever the position is in your city, and look for people in your area that you could talk to, or at least in your region, because we want the salaries to be commensurate with the geographic region. So for instance, if you live in San Francisco, a very expensive city with higher salaries in general, you don't want to be looking at individuals who maybe work in a much lower income geographic area in the US. So apples to apples. And then reach out to those folks on LinkedIn and say, I'm in job transition right now. I'm looking for a position similar to yours. Would you have a couple minutes to just talk to me about the company you work for? I'm really interested in learning more about XYZ company and thinking about applying with them. Most people are more than happy to have those conversations with you. Also, go to that company website in advance and do a little research, see what kind of publications they put out, what do they talk about in terms of their mission, what are their corporate values, if they're a nonprofit organization, what is their mission statement. You can also look at annual reports and then search articles on the web about those companies as well to gain insight. So those are great ways to prepare, and expect to get questions around that. Another common question from recruiters is, when would you be able to start? What's your availability? You should have a calendar available, and if you're in job search, know when you're available and provide those parameters. If you know you're not an early morning person, or you don't have a great energy level at the end of the day, it's okay to tell them I'm available from 9 to 3 p.m. for interviews. Give them a start date that's realistic for you. If you're transitioning from a job that you currently have to a new position, maybe you want to take a week off in between just to kind of reset and rejuvenate. Things to keep in mind. It's okay to give parameters and to have some structure around what you want. Yes, you want to be open and flexible, but if they're asking, then, let them meet you halfway. If the job's out of state, you also need to be mindful and have thought about whether or not you're willing to relocate, and what does that time frame look like, and what kind of compensation do you need in order to make a move outside of your hometown or state. Very common interview questions. And then I mentioned the scoring. Your overall score that the recruiter will assign to you will be based on the following. And this is a very long list, so stick with me, but there is going to be points attached to each of these. This is straight from recruiters I've worked with who work with large companies and represent them. This is the criteria they are given and assigned points to. Your educational background, which will be cited in the job description. So if they require a bachelor's degree and you don't have one, you're getting 0 points. If they require a bachelor's but master's preferred, you'll get a requisite amount of points for the bachelor, but additional points for the master's, okay? Work experience, include your volunteer work and internships if it aligns with the job. Verbal communication, enthusiasm for the position. So we're standing and smiling on the phone, right? We're answering the phone right away. We're answering these questions with a great deal of energy. Your knowledge of the company. They want to know that you've done your research and that this is the company you really want to work for. A recruiter doesn't want to hear about how you've applied for 50 different positions and this is just one of them. They want to get the sense that this is the company you're most interested in working for. So being knowledgeable, showing that you've done your due diligence is going to go a long way in a high score from the recruiter. Your interpersonal skills, the initiative that you demonstrate, your time management. So again, that has to do with scheduling this call, sticking to the parameters that they've laid out. So if they say we're going to have a 15-minute phone screen, make sure you're keeping your answers brief so that you can stay within that time frame. Critical thinking and reasoning skills. And they're going to test that through some situational questions. They're going to give you a scenario and ask you to kind of solve that problem or address how you would deal with it to see how you think on your feet and apply your critical thinking. Personality, are you a fit for the culture? So expect some questions around that. And again, that's why you need to do your homework. And if you have had informational conversations with people within that company during your prep time, cite that, make sure and tell them, well, I spoke to a couple of your marketing staff in preparation for this, and they shared with me how team-oriented ABC company is. And that's such a great fit for me because I love working in a team environment. And as you can see from my resume, most of my work has been in small teams. So that's kind of how you answer that question and address that. That's going to give you the maximum points. Customer service. Again, salary expectation, you've done your homework there. And then overall impression and recommendations. And let's be honest, folks, likability is big. And that goes back to personality, but also just how you come across. It's difficult to have phone conversations with people. So if they're feeling that energy and they're enjoying the conversation, and remember, recruiters are making 60 to 80, in some cases 100 calls a week. So it's hard to make an impression. It really is. You've got your work cut out for you. If you do a good job and you've got sharp, interesting, engaging answers, little anecdotes that you can share during the interview that drive home what your skills are, that's going to make a great impression and it's going to stick in the mind of that recruiter. Okay, so now we've talked about phone interviews and recruiter screens. Let's move on to the video interview. And I'm guessing a lot of you over the last few months during COVID have had quite a bit of video interaction, maybe Microsoft Teams, some Zoom or FaceTime conversations. We're getting a little more comfortable with videos, but the interview is obviously a little bit more formal than that. So let's dive into how to best prepare for a video interview. As I mentioned, FaceTime, Zoom, Skype are all becoming more and more common in today's fast-paced and global market. even before the onset of this pandemic, where we were relegated to video conferencing was already emerging as a prime tool for interviewing, and you can expect that to continue growing in the future. So whether we like it or not, we need to become very astute interviewers via video. So I'm hoping that the following slides will help prepare you and help elevate your video presentation. Let's start with the checklist. Let me go back. Make sure that you are prepared for an in-person video by being seated at a table with a neutral background, setting the stage, perhaps placing yourself in a place that is going to focus on you. And we think about maybe you've had a headshot done professionally, and they always tell you that your headshot should have a very plain background, right? So that all the focus is on your face and your personality. Video is the same thing. You want to have a neutral background, no distractions, nothing going on behind you, so that the interviewer is just looking at you. Attach your notes around the perimeter of your laptop or computer monitor. I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. I almost think they were created just for this because they're so ideal for placing around your monitor. Make sure you don't place it over the camera part, of course, but it's a great way to kind of keep your eye on the camera and be looking forward. And then using your peripheral vision, you can actually glance at notes so that you don't get stuck along the way. Make sure you're seated and ready 5 to 10 minutes prior to your scheduled time of interview. You may want to check in with a friend or colleague earlier in the day. Make sure your technology is working. We're going to get to that more in detail in just a moment, but be prepared. Do the test on the speakers. Regardless of what type of computer you have, they're going to have some type of application where you can test out the speakers ahead of time. I highly recommend doing that. And you may want to adjust your seat as well, or the placement of the video camera and laptop so that you're not all facing the screen, but you're not set back too much. And, just get it ideal. Think about when you're watching a newscaster on TV and their placement in front of the camera. So about to your torso, right? And full face and a little bit of plain background. So you want to space yourself within that camera space, ideally. During the interview, again, like the phone, remember to smile. And now we have the benefit of the interviewer being able to see us. So nodding your head demonstrates that you're engaged and that you're listening. It's the best form of body language to show engagement and listening skills. So I love nodding and smiling while they're talking. It shows you're actively listening. And always keep your eye on that camera with the interviewer. So regardless of where they are placed, remember that you're looking at the camera, and that's going to be placed, of course, at the top of your video monitor or at the top of your phone if you're working off of a smartphone. Let the interviewer log off the platform before you do. That just allows them to feel that sense of control that they're on the interview. If they decide, oh my gosh, I have a last minute question, you don't want to show too much urgency about getting off the call and cut them off. Let them be in charge of the time, the technology leading you through that interview. So let them log off first. Once you've seen them logged off, then you can shut down, breathe a sigh of relief that you've completed the interview. As I mentioned, body language is the key. So how do we want to present ourselves? Calm, relaxed, and ready for a great conversation. And that's really what an interview should be, is a conversation. So by smiling, nodding, welcoming that person in with your body, that's going to encourage more conversation than just a series of questions and answers. And we've all been through that interview, right? Where you're asked a question, you provide the answer, they nod, they give you another question, you provide an answer. It's really not a conversation. And so we want to instigate conversation in these video interviews. And I've got some tips on how to do that. But it all starts with body language, expressing enthusiasm, sincerity, interest in the position, and positivity through your smile. Sitting up straight with your shoulders back projects confidence and professionalism. And remember to wear the type of clothing that you would for an in-person interview, and choose from your wardrobe carefully. The nice thing about a video interview is it doesn't matter what time of year you're interviewing. You don't have to worry about the elements outside. If something that may be a little heavier fabric, but it just makes you feel good, you love that suit, you love that blouse or that shirt because it just projects confidence and you feel good in it, you can wear that at any time. So choose your clothes carefully. Make sure you're comfortable, because if you're not physically comfortable, it's going to show. So let's talk a little bit about setting up your space for the video interview. We had mentioned a distraction-free space and quiet with a plain background. I want to reiterate that again. It's particularly important with these video interviews that you have everything prepared in advance and you're comfortable, so you can just focus all of your attention on that camera and drawing in that interviewer. So what should we have on our space? Computer, resume, job description, notes, and a pen for note-taking. So that's the one time when it is acceptable during an interview to veer your attention away from that interviewer. And you can even say to them, oh, thank you for sharing that. I just want to write that down. Or, oh, let me jot that down. I really like that. Because you may want to go back to something they said when it's time for you to answer questions. Note-taking and that slight distraction of writing during the interview will be perceived positively. It's the one instance in which you can distract your eyes, and it demonstrates that, wow, what you're saying, Mr. or Ms. Interviewer, is really engaging, and I'm very interested in this position, so I want to make sure I'm capturing everything you're saying. I'm listening attentively to you, and I don't want to miss anything that you just shared. So it's a great way to use body language and show authentically that you are interested. Lighting, that's really important. And this is something that I've learned doing live webinars, is that oftentimes I have to adjust my overhead light, but also my desk lamp so that I'm not too shiny or too dark on the screen. So that's something you want to test out in advance as well. And for ladies and gentlemen, you want to apply a little bit of powder to your face so that you don't appear shiny. You might want to be mindful of, if you need to spray your hair, things like that. Anything that might show the slightest distraction. And if you get oily or kind of shiny because you get nervous when you're on screen, you may want to have something by the side that you can dab right before the interviewer. Just dab over, that shiny spot. It's usually our nose, that kind of T-zone. Men and women get that. A piece of tissue paper works as a great blotting tool to not move our makeup or anything else. Men can use a piece of tissue paper as well. And it's a great way to just kind of take that shine away without really changing anything on our appearance. So actually, tissue paper is the greatest free thing that you have in your house, beyond powder, that will just take that shine away. So just a little beauty tip there. Getting familiar with your tech. Yes, This is a point of anxiety for so many of us. And, you know, it's part of our reality today. Let's be honest. We need to engage via video. We need to use technology to communicate with others and oftentimes to do our jobs effectively. So I found that I've had a lot of anxiety over the last few months, especially since we haven't had the option of face-to-face interactions. And I found that each time I use a new platform, it becomes a little more comfortable. So the best suggestion I can share from someone low tech to maybe someone else listening who considers themselves low tech as well, just keep practicing. Every single time you use Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or Microsoft Teams, your comfort level gets a little bit higher. So it's really all about practice. I encourage you to try a few different platforms and find out what your preference is, because sometimes you will be offered the option with an interview and they may say, do you prefer Skype or Zoom? It's great to know what your preference is and where you have a higher comfort level and be able to suggest that or make that choice that's going to make you even more comfortable. Again, we want to be able to focus on our performance and not be distracted by technology issues. So play with your technology in advance. One of the biggest things is bandwidth and getting a good connection. And I know some of us have experienced that with Zoom meetings during COVID. So play with Zoom or whatever your platform is during different times a day. Find out if you have any bandwidth issues. Do you need to upgrade your computer with more bandwidth? Do you need to move to a different room of the house where maybe your Wi-Fi is stronger? These are all little things that can make a big difference. You don't want to have any problems during that video interview. So play with it in advance. And speakers are the other thing. Make sure that your audio is working, because it would be a shame if that interviewer couldn't hear all the things that you have to share. Ask a friend to contact you an hour before the interviewer to test out the webcam and the microphone, or the built-in cam. And in most cases, you'll have a built-in one in your laptop or computer. Have someone do a quick call to you, check in. It's also a good way to kind of shake out your anxiety, is to talk to someone friendly an hour before your interview. Let that friend or family member give you that, good luck, you're gonna nail it, you know? I know you're gonna have a great interview. And it's also a way to address the technology in advance. Make sure that your camera's at eye level. So I know a lot of people need to adjust their laptops, their seating. You may need to put your laptop on a book, whatever's going to give you the best visual on the video cam. And for some of us on a certain age, we've learned that, oh, I don't want to look like I have a double chin, or I want to focus on kind of my better side and maybe have it a little bit at an angle. If you're really nervous about things like that, if you're self-conscious about how you look on video, play with your tech in advance, because we all do have a better side or a better angle. And if that's going to make you more confident to have your laptop elevated a little so the camera's coming down just a bit on you, do it. Do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel confident and at your best. And finally, practice looking at the camera and not your screen. Remember, regardless of how that interviewer is going to appear as though they're looking at your face, they're looking at the camera too. So look at the camera, not at them. And remember, we've all had problems during video interviews and video conferences. Eventually, technology will fail us during one of these encounters. So it's important to remain positive and polite. Have a plan. And that plan may include saying to that interviewer, oh, I'm afraid we're breaking up. I think we're having a problem. let's disconnect for 30 seconds and I'll call you back. Or would you prefer to call me back in 1 minute? You know, have a suggestion. This is actually even though it's kind of worst scenario possible, right, that your technology is going to fail, look at it as an opportunity to demonstrate to that interviewer that when there is a technology failure, which does happen to all of us, I can handle it. I'm a problem solver. I'm solution oriented. And I know how to deal with something in the moment when it's a crisis. This is a great way to demonstrate those attributes that you have as someone who's really prepared. So think about that. No matter what you do to prepare, something might happen. You could have a power outage in your community. There's just so many things that could happen that are out of our control. So think of how you would deal with that in advance. And you may even want to say to that interviewer at the onset of your call, it's so nice to see your face. I'm glad we can hear each other. Shall we come up with a strategy just in case? You know, you may want to work that out in advance. It shows them that you're completely proactive, you're really savvy, and you know that technology mishaps occur. And finally, close your other computer applications to avoid pop-ups and other distractions during your interview. I'm going to raise my hand on that one and say I've had that happen where I've had my email. You know, when I get a new email, it pops up on the screen. So make sure you take care of that in advance. It's so distracting when you're talking to someone on video and all of a sudden out of the corner of your eye, you see that pop up. So make sure you address that in advance. I really wanted to include that slide because it's completely unnerving when it happens. Okay, so we're toward the end of this webinar now. I hope you've got some great tips and ideas about how to prepare for and engage in these interviews. But I wanted to share at the conclusion here some common questions and best answers that you can share. I think this is a great way to wrap things up. So let's start with the questions you should expect in an interview. What are one of the skills that makes you most qualified for the position? What professional achievement are you most proud of? Tell me about a time when you overcame a challenge. Let's stop with those three. Very common interview questions. And as a career coach, this is something that I talk through with clients a lot. And oftentimes we'll do a mock interview and we'll practice this. So one of the things I love about these questions is it opens the door for storytelling. And if you haven't considered storytelling as a way to answer interview questions, I want to put that out there and ask you to consider it. Storytelling can be one of the most compelling ways to engage an interviewer. And what do I mean by storytelling? In 1 minute, you can answer a question by providing the challenge. Look at this third one. Can you tell me about a time you overcame a challenge? The action you took and the results. In the coaching world, we call that a CAR story. It's an acronym. Challenge, action, results is the acronym. CAR. So you describe the challenge that you faced in a job, the action steps that you took to solve it, and what the result was. And that result may very well be highlighted in your resume. And in fact, it should be one of the bullets under your jobs. You know, an achievement. I raised sales in my department by 20% in the first quarter, or I increased our customer satisfaction ratings by 30%. Something like that, a quantitative, measurable outcome. That's a result that you want to share. And that's really what they're looking for. And I'll just share a really quick anecdote with you. I used to host an event called Calling to the Pros. And in Calling to the Pros, we had a panel discussion made up of hiring managers and recruiters who served as guests for our audience made up of job seekers. And this panel would share best practices for those interviewing. They would share what they wanted to hear in an interview, how you answer questions, what they're looking for when they ask you a certain question, what attributes are most important in a candidate, what makes them eliminate a candidate right away, you know? And this was one of the most popular events I hosted because it was an opportunity for job seekers like yourself to talk directly to those hiring managers and recruiters and saying, what are you really looking for? How do you want me to answer this question? What are you looking to hear? And storytelling came up time and time again. And here's why. Going back to that recruiter's point of view and what their job is, imagine you in their shoes for a moment, and you have to make 80 calls a week and talk to individuals about the same job, and you're asking the same questions over and over again. Imagine how rote that would become after a while, how tedious. So what can you do as a candidate to shake that up a little bit and get that recruiter excited about having a conversation with you? You share an anecdote. You tell them a story about a real situation that you faced in the workplace. And sometimes it's going to be funny. Sometimes it's going to be terrifying, but at the very least, it's going to be memorable because it's something that really happened to you. And it's putting you in that position that you're interviewing for. And it's demonstrating in a real life scenario how you can do the job. So now that recruiter or interviewer can start visualizing you in the position that you're interviewing for. So storytelling is an incredibly powerful tool. Remember the CAR model. What's the challenge I faced? What were the action steps I took? And what was the result? That's the best way to answer those first three questions. How would you describe your working style? What 3 words would you use to describe your ideal work environment? And why do you want to work for this company? Those last 3 questions are them looking for someone who's researched, who's prepared, and very interested in working for their company. And how do you demonstrate that? You've done your homework. And so the way you answer those 3 questions is to cite the research and preparation you've done for this conversation. Well, when I interviewed folks who worked for this company, or when I researched your website, or when I read these articles, you cite where you did your work. When I looked you up on Glassdoor, when I did this, and then talk about what you learned from the research. And based on that, I understand that you have a very high energy work environment. And that really matches X job that I had in 2018, which was very high paced as well. And I found that I did my best work when it was really a demanding, high paced environment. So you kind of bring in your experience and align that with that question, okay? Situational interview questions are always going to happen. Maybe not in a first interview or in a phone screen, but definitely in second and third interviews. You should be prepared for a situation. That's where these storytelling preparations are going to really be key for you and help you score a lot of points with a hiring manager. And these stories, by the way, should be limited to a 1-minute answer. So describe a real life challenge you encountered that's posed by the interviewer. So if they say, well, this is a problem we have in our department, and they're going to describe it to you, how would you handle this interpersonal issue that we have? Or how would you handle this? This competition we have between our sales teams, or, something like that. They're going to give you a scenario. You want to have a prepared story that can relate to that very scenario and say, well, I actually had a situation at my last job like that, or, oh yes, I'm familiar with that dynamic in the workplace. I've dealt with that personality type before. Here's how I handled it. And so you're going to be able to relate that to something you did in your real work-life situation that's similar or identical to what they're posing. Address the problem or challenge, address the action steps, and quantify your results. That's your knockout punch at the end, is what the result was. So don't forget to tell them how the situation resolved itself and what happened as a result of your action steps, okay? Storytelling is the key, guys. It's really powerful in interviews. And I'm going to leave you with this great quote from Andrew Stanton, who's the co-writer of the Toy Story movies. I'm sure everyone's familiar with these if you're young or old. And I love his quote. A great story comes from using what you know, capturing a truth from experiencing it, and expressing the values you feel deeply. Allow the listener, and that's your interviewer, to make his or her own deduction about you from the story. That is, don't come out and say that you're collaborative, adaptable, etc. Tell a story that convinces the listener that you possess these traits. I can't think of a better quote to speak to how storytelling is applied to the interview process and what a powerful tool it is. So I hope this is a great takeaway for you. I hope you start developing your stories that you can share both over the phone and on video. And let's wrap up with a few questions you can ask before concluding the interview. They will undoubtedly ask you at the end of the interview, do you have any questions for us? For goodness sake, always say yes, guys. Always show that you have enthusiasm for the position and have questions prepared. Here's a few that you might want to share. How would you describe a typical day in the position? What's the typical work week? Is overtime expected? Those are culture-based questions. So if you want to know more about the culture and expectations of the company, those are 3 questions that you could ask. What's the most important thing I should accomplish in the first 90 days? That's very specific to the expectations of your supervisor and the department you'll be working in. So if you want to really get at that, that's a great question. How much travel is expected? That may or may not be relevant to the position you're seeking. If it is, if it's mentioned in the job description or in the interview, expand on that. Get them to elaborate a little more about that, as well as relocation being a possibility. Try to avoid yes and no questions because, again, we want to be conversational. If that hiring manager gets off the phone or the video with you and says, wow, that was a really interesting conversation, you've got it. You are moving on to the next phase of the interview process. So open-ended questions, questions that allow that interviewer to talk a little bit about him or herself is great. Now keep in mind, there's a difference between recruiters, hiring managers, interviewers. If it's a recruiter, that's someone who doesn't work directly for the company. They work on behalf of the company. So they represent a number of different organizations and companies. So you're not going to be able to ask them really specific questions about day-to-day. They won't know that. By the time you move beyond the phone screen, you will likely be talking to someone within the company, a hiring manager that works like for their HR department, or an actual supervisor or manager of the department for which you would be working. So you need to know who you're talking to with these questions and what their position is within the company. So just keep that in mind with these questions. What do you think are the most important qualities for someone to excel in this role? That's telling them right away Listen, you're going to get 110% from me. I'm someone who's going to come in and I want to be highly productive, successful. I want to really make things happen for this department. So tell me what I need to do to be successful. What would you characterize as the values of the company? This also gives you an opportunity to align what that person states as their values with your own values. And that's a really great conversation to have, is how you're doing work that really means something to you and that you're working toward a larger goal. That can be a really exciting conversation, is when there's a real fit in terms of values. How would you describe the culture of the company? What are the biggest challenges of the job? And again, if the interviewer is employed by the company, I love this question, guys. Ask them what they like best about working for the company. It's a really positive last question to ask, and it makes it more personal and it helps you build rapport with that person. Everyone loves to talk about themselves, and now you're asking them a question that, yes, is relevant. So it can be personal because it's relevant to the job, but you're asking them their opinion now and not just facts. And it's a little more personal and it's going to really draw them in. I've never posed that to someone where I haven't received a really positive answer in return. So I love that question. If it's someone who works for the company, ask them what they love best about their job. It's a great way to end the interview. I hope you found this helpful. If you'd like to learn more about some tools, workshops, personal coaching that I do, feel free to visit my website at yournextchapter.com. I wish you the very best in your job search and hope that your next phone or video interview is a great success. Thanks for joining me today.